So I'm going to take you on this experiment I decided to do, and the basis of this experiment is a lot of people use put call ratios and option volume to determine market sentiment and market movement for the following week. And that's great, but I wondered if we could use the leverage shares to dictate sentiment. If there was any relationship between things like UPRO, SQQ, SPXS, et cetera, in determining the overall sentiment in the movement of the market in terms of the weeks. So I decided to embark on this little experiment, and I thought I would just make this the first video I did on YouTube, would be to have you come along with me while I embark on this experiment to see if we can actually use volume profiles and trading behavior of UPRO and SPXS to predict SPY. If there was enough information there to make meaningful informations about what SPY can and or will do. The basis being that SPXS, anybody who is buying that is bearish on SPY. There is no question about that. If you are buying an inverse leverage share, you are bearish. If you are buying a leveraged share, bull share, such as UPRO, you are bullish. So the thinking is that the more volume going into the bullish shares versus the bearish shares should actually shed light on where the market sentiment is going. But I wanted to test that statistically. So if you come along with me here, we're going to launch up TradingView, and we're going to make sure we're going to set it to the weekly time frame. We're on SPY right now. We want to make sure we have our volume enabled, and we are going to export the chart data. I like to use ISO time, so we're going to export that. So it's saved. Now we're going to go over to UPRO, and we are going to export this data as well. Same process. We're going to export that chart data. You can also do this using Yahoo Finance, but I find it just easier to do on TradingView. And so we're going to do SPXS next. Again, change the time format, export, and that is done. So now we're going to go ahead and we are going to open up these files into Excel. You can use OpenOffice if you want. I am going to rename the titles just so I know which ticker I'm working with, because we're going to ultimately, the end game is that we're going to have 3 tickers here. We're going to have SPY, SPXS, and UPRO. So you want to just keep all of the information organized. I'm going to delete the moving average because we don't care about the moving average. Now we're going to open up SPXS. And so one thing that we have to do is we have to make sure that the timelines are adding up. So if we look at SPY, we see that we have data from 2009, 06, 08, the week, 06, 22. So we want to make sure that the data is the same time frame. It has to be the same week, otherwise it's not going to work. So I'm going to just remove the excess data because it doesn't go that far back on SPXS, or UPRO rather, and we're going to copy over, once we make sure that the dates all line up, we're going to copy that over into our main working file. I'm going to go ahead and rename these to UPRO. Again, just making sure that we're keeping everything organized, that I know which ticker I'm working with, which data sets are coming from where, and that'll help me when I go to analyze the data to determine where the relationships lie. So we're just going to rush through this. And then we're going to repeat the process for SPXS. So we're going to open up the SPXS database, and we are going to do the exact same thing. We need to make sure that those dates are lining up. You see the trading history is a bit different for SPXS. It's because all of these things hit the market at differing times. So we want to make sure that it's all lined up. Delete the excess dates that we can't really use. Get rid of that volume moving average. I'm not sure why TradingView puts that there, but yeah, and then we're going to copy it over. Same principle. We're going to make sure that we're labeling all of our data. It's really tedious doing this, labeling your data, but trust me, sometimes I've been so lazy to label my data, and I'm working with massive data sets, and then I'm like, oh my god, what was this variable again? and it causes a lot of problems. So it's really annoying, but if you're doing any kind of math or quant-based statistics trading or anything at all, if you're like a math student, whatever, always label your data sets, because it is something that I've run into so many times where I'm like, oh my God, I don't remember what variable this is. And so we're just going to save this, and we are going to, I'm going to use SPSS. I just prefer it. You can use Excel, you can use SAS, you can use MATLAB. So I'm using SPSS. I'm going to import my document that we just created, make sure all the data is correct, and there we go. So now we have this data in SPSS, and we can actually start to draw some analyses. So we're going to go to bivariate analyses, and what I want to look for here is I want to look to see the relationship between SPXS and UPRO volume on all of SPI's variables. So it's high, low, open, close, etc. And so SPSS generates this table, and we can now see the Pearson correlation for all of these variables. So we can see here that UPRO and SPXS volume all have quite a significant relationship with SPI's behavior. So if we look, we can see all of the Pearson correlations are over 5. This indicates a fairly strong statistical relationship with the data, between the data. So this is a very good sign. It already is starting to validate my hypothesis that we could use this data to predict SPI movement. So now what we're going to do is we're going to just look at volume, and we're going to save as standardize variable. This will convert all of the data into a z-score. Now the reason we're doing that is because we want to chart just to look at the history of how this is traded according to its average. So if you know z-score, you know that it measures the distance from the mean. What I want to do is I want to look to see generally where the volume lies over its entire trading history, apples to apples. So the z-score standardizes it so it's both represented in an identical sense. And you can see for the most part, UPRO is represented in purple and SPXX in blue. For the most part, UPRO has always traded above SPXS because, you know, there's the bull market thesis. However, recently, over the past year, we see that SPXS has had a huge spike in volume, and that's because we've spent the last over a year in a bear market. So that is kind of what we expect to see, that huge spike in volume for the bear shares. So now that we have that, what I want to do is I want to just take a look at more recent, like just the past few weeks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just go back up to December, and I'm going to pull the just these last couple of weeks where the market has kind of been rallying, and I just want to see how the volume compares over the shorter time frame. I prefer to look at charts in Excel, which is why I'm copying the data over to Excel. You can do this in SPSS, MATLAB, SAS, whatever is your preference. Mine is Excel. I find Excel much more user-friendly. So now when we look over the past couple of weeks, we do see that UPRO is really pretty much stagnant. It's not really gaining any increase in volume, and SPXS is actually kind of overall increasing. So we're seeing more influx into SPXS than we're seeing into UPRO, which means that overall the sentiment right now, we can make the assumption that the sentiment is still fairly bearish, right? Because we're not seeing UPRO spiking. We're not seeing a huge amount of volume being taken by UPRO. So people are still not very bullish who are buying these leveraged shares, right? So the last thing that we can do that I'm interested in doing is I want to just look at the generic volume. So I just want to compare volume to volume. So we're going to take SPXS volume, and we're going to, again, I like to chart it in Excel. And then we're going to take UPRO volume, and I just want to compare the raw volume to each other, because it's going to be helpful to see how many shares of UPRO versus how many shares of SPXS are being bought over the same couple of week time frame. So this is since December. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a line chart, and we're going to just take a look to see where we are. And you see it looks identical to the z-score chart. We see a massive influx in SPXS buying and very little in UPRO buying, but we do see that UPRO is sort of increasing. We do see a little bit of an uptrend starting with UPRO volume, but SPXS is still dominating the market. And so now what we're doing is we are going to just compare the overall, since its history, volume apples to apples. So we're going to compare raw volume since its trading history just to see where we are. And you can see it's exactly the same as the z-score. We had UPRO dominating since its inception, and only recently, only since 2022, has SPXS's volume actually surpassed that of UPRO. And it is still holding very strong. We are seeing much more volume on SPXS than we are on UPRO, and UPRO is not yet recovering that lead in terms of the predominant sentiment. So now the next thing that we want to do is we want to copy over the previous week data to do next week data, because what we want to see is whether the volume of all of these things actually have a predictive effect on SPY for next week. So we create a new data set, essentially just copying forward 1 week, and we can repeat the same correlation test, but only what we're going to do is we're going to use previous week volume, and we're going to compare previous week volume to next week variables to see whether there is a statistical relationship. And so here we have our volume and its effect on next week data. And we can see that that significant relationship still exists. It's still over 0.5 in a Pearson correlation. So this means that the previous week volume actually does have some kind of predictive value and relationship with next week data. So we can actually begin to hypothesize how we can use this data to draw conclusions about next week price action and highs and lows. And how we can do that will be the subject of another video in the future. I just wanted to share this little experiment with you. Essentially, the hypothesis is correct. We have indeed verified that we can use UPRO and SPXS volume to predict SPY behavior. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you enjoyed this video.